So the recording is on, and I am welcoming everybody to the Aquarian Minyan. And this is our evening programming, our star programming, our marquee programming tonight with Ami Goodman, the first to bat in December. This is really, really special to have you here. You all know Ami as a retired pediatrician. He was a neonatologist, maybe I'm saying that right or not, at Kaiser in San Francisco. And he has volunteered in healthcare capacities and to help people who are going through crisis in trying to obtain asylum from Central America and other social justice activities, but coming to all of these things from his being informed by his own Jewishness and his own experience of Judaism. I think a really unique perspective, and looking forward to hearing about his story tonight, his story of going to Standing Rock. So without any further ado, Ami.
Thank you. Maybe at the end we can sing a song. And I'm thinking hello to my, first of all, hello to everyone. Hello to my friends who are my medical colleagues, my friends who are in all different lines. And we're going to go ahead and screen share. I hope this works. It's going to be, let's see here, this. And I'll do this. Oops, that's not what I want. Wait, gotta go all the way to the beginning. Sorry. Let me get out of that and go back to the beginning. Okay. Now we can start. Can you all see that? Is that clear? Okay. And if anyone wants to unmute during this time and say anything or just a quick comment, but we'll have time at the end for talking. So the title of this presentation is Sacred Space, Holy Rage, Prayerful Resistance, Lessons I Learned at Standing Rock, lessons I learned as a physician, as a volunteer physician there, and also as a Jew. Let me see. Oh. And before we continue, we must honor and acknowledge these sacred lands of the various tribes of the Ohlone Nation throughout the Bay Area, the nations of the Coast and Bay Miwok, the Pomo, Kashaya, Patwin, and Mishawal-Wapo nations, whose unceded lands were stolen, and on which we are truly guests today. And I would urge all of you who are not from the Bay Area to spend time and investigate on whose land you're a guest, and who are the tribes that are still the nations, and tribes of the nations that are still in existence in the area that you live, or were driven from it. But this is something that we should all know, something that is important. So my story begins really with becoming aware of what this whole thing was about a pipeline that was supposed to be built carrying fracked oil from North Dakota to Illinois. And this was supposed to have passed through parts of North Dakota. This is a better map. The original plan was to have the pipeline come across the Missouri River north of Bismarck, North Dakota, which is a large, relatively speaking, large town by North Dakota standards, and then come around here and down and on its way to Illinois. This, as you can see, is the land of the Sioux lands that was promised by the 1851 treaty, and that treaty was eventually broken. This is the unceded Sioux territory under the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie. Here is Standing Rock area, and this is the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. When the people of Bismarck in which most of the indigenous Native American people live on the reservation. When the people of Bismarck learned that this pipeline was coming through north of their city, there was a great outrage, and there was great political pressure, and the pipeline path was changed, and it was now going to be coming through directly through the Sioux lands and directly across the Missouri River, which had been dammed, and so there was a lake of sorts here, Lake Oahe. Oh, I have to look at it closely, and then continue here. The pipeline would have crossed directly on the area of the Sacred Stones camps where Standing Rock is, would have gone under the Missouri River and then continued on its way. A direct threat, as it was up here, a direct threat because of inevitable leakage, which always happens with all pipelines. Even if it's undetected, there are leakages all the time, and contamination of the water, contamination of the land. But the people of Bismarck raised their voices. They would have been affected, as would have the downriver people, but now it was going to directly cross here. Here's a close-up, the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline. One of many pipelines, by the way. There's the famous Keystone Pipeline, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. There's many pipelines. Inevitably, many of them do pass through sacred lands of the indigenous lands. This is where it was supposed to come across, right? And here is the lake was created by a dam. This is Sacred Stone. This is Standing Rock, Oseti Saquin main camp at Standing Rock where I was. And this is Cannonball, adjacent to it. It's a small town. Again, it was an 1,100 mile long conduit. Tribal historic preservation officers of the Sioux Nation requested archaeological investigation. None of this was done. Sacred lands, just to review. Mount Rushmore is located in the Black Hills, land that is sacred to a number of tribes. It's also land, according to the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, that was to belong to the American Indians forever, but that was abrogated because an expedition that Custer led discovered gold there. And so that land, that treaty was famously abrogated, as were treaty after treaty. Just a quick timeline. These two treaties, we talked about 1851 and 1868, notoriously violated. 1876 was the Great Sioux War, Little Bighorn, Custer. In 1890, there was an infamous massacre of 300 Sioux by the U.S. Cavalry at Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And this became a seminal date for the Native American history in their country that we live in and occupy. AIM was founded in 1968, the American Indian Movement, and occupied Alcatraz Island famously, and also occupied Mount Rushmore in 1971. In 1973, the Pine Ridge Reservation, there was a 71-day occupation of Wounded Knee, again, sort of following what happened at Wounded Knee in 1890, in protest of broken treaties. And this is when Russell Means and Dennis Banks were arrested, and 2 years later, Leonard Peltier was arrested in Pine Ridge. The famous movers of the American Indian movement. There was this militant response was happening, and it continued in different forms. More timeline. I can't see because it's covering it. I think it says that there was the beginnings of when they found out about the pipeline north of Standing Rock. There was an organization mainly by teenagers and women, the Indigenous Youth Council and activist indigenous women began prayerful, peaceful prayer camps there, nonviolent gathering of Native American at Standing Rock in opposition to the desecration and likely contamination of the Missouri River and the Lake Oahe by the DAPL. It grew nationwide, and people, tribes and nations started coming and helping in this movement. Sacred Stone, Rosebud, the camps right around Standing Rock formed, and eventually attracted as many as 10,000 people. In 2016, the North Dakota governor declared a state of emergency, instituting roadblocks because of the prayerful resistance that was happening against the continuation of the pipeline under the Missouri River. That was where all of this was taking place. Protesters in September of 2016, I must back up and say in the summer of 2016 is when this started happening, and that's when Ami Goodman started reporting these events on Democracy Now!, the first reporter to really get in there and find out exactly what was going on. In 2016, the protectors, they were not protesters, they were protectors of their land and their water, opposing the energy, this company confronted by private security with pepper spray and dogs. Obama intervened. Environmental impact reports were requested. This was overruled in October. And in November of 2016, famously, the protectors had a peaceful action that was met by the militarized police that were now surrounding this enlarging camp with freezing water cannons, rubber bullets, tear gas, pepper spray. And on December 5th, 2016, it was planned that the Army Corps, that there was going to be a mass evacuation. The militarized police were going to come down on the camp and evacuate it. But Obama halted that. Because there was not a complete EIS, environmental impact survey. So on a technicality, it was held. That was when I was there, and I'll get to that. Oh, Energy Transfer Partners, that's the people that were behind the construction. And the forced evacuation, I said, was planned for December 5th, 2016. This was a temporary victory, but as soon as Trump came into office, he completely reversed all of that, and the camps were dismantled in February of 2017, and oil flow began in June of 2017. So that's the timeline. I was there during the I went there because there was a call for volunteers, healthcare people, to come because of the impending action on December 5th that was bound to bring injuries, and people were asked to come and help.
Quick question: is the oil still flowing, or has it been stopped?
We'll get to that. It had been flowing. Yes, it had been flowing, and there were leakages. There was a large leakage even when we were there. So again, arguments against the DAPL pipeline. It crosses under the Missouri River. It would have contaminated. It was known as the Black Snake among the people, and of course the treaty violation we talked about. Then there were the corporate arguments for the pipeline, and saying it crosses under the Missouri. It's not going to be a problem. It's safe, environmentally sensitive. To transport, the best way to transport the crude oil to market, does not cross the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation land, which is totally not true. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had many meetings. All these arguments were given, but the dam itself that created the lake, the Army Corps of Engineers had built 5 dams during this period of time on the Missouri River, forcing Native Americans to relocate from their most life-giving land to harshly exposed grazing upland. Typical. 200,000 acres on the Standing Rock Reservation had been flooded by the Oahe Dam, creating the lake. And we've seen that throughout the country over and over again. Trump happened to be a shareholder of the Energy Transfer Partners. And at that time, his energy secretary, Rick Perry, had been on the board as well until he had to leave because of some legal issues that were brought up against him. And there had been a number of spills from other adjacent pipelines way north of DAPL, way north of Standing Rock, tributaries that were going to feed the main pipeline. And many of the leakages fell under the detectable level that the sensors in the pipelines have. And that's an ongoing problem too. The sensors don't detect small leaks, which become big leaks over time. So I'll share a little bit about what all of this information, how it connected to me. This is a sign in front of Standing Rock Camp. What moved me to volunteer, first thing happened was I heard the story by Ami Goodman, as I mentioned, on Democracy Now! In March of 2016 of the brutally violent police action against the protectors and the continuing news of the struggle in violent police actions. And all of you probably were aware of this happening if you watched Democracy Now! Or read the papers. What moved me was that I began to learn about the history of the broken treaties, the doctrine of discovery, which I didn't realize what that even was, the doctrine that goes back to the conquistadors that said that when the conquistadors came here, they could, because they discovered the land, that was enough for that to become ownership of the land, newly discovered land, not realizing, of course, that people had been living there for thousands of years. And that doctrine of discovery continued up until into the 1900s. I think it was finally overturned, if I'm not mistaken, not so long ago in Spain. And the disturbing parallels that were so obvious to me in Israel, the occupation, the usurpation and violation of Palestinian lands and rights, the olive groves, everything, the land, the houses, the keys, everything was just kind of whoa. Many local demonstrations here in San Francisco that Abby and I would start going to, especially by a group called Idle No More, which is a one of many local indigenous organizations that very activist and would have demonstrations at the Army Corps of Engineers and at City Hall in San Francisco, and we would go to those. And then through my affiliation at UCSF, I became aware, actually I think it was through my daughter, who was then in nurse practitioner school or on her way towards that, but was aware of this group called Do No Harm Coalition at UCSF, headed by a physician named Rupa Maria, and it was composed, and it still is composed, it's very active, of doctors and nurses and all healthcare provider folks at UCSF, and very activist group. And one thing they were very involved with and very concerned about was what was happening at Standing Rock. And then my family was encouraging me, especially my kids, to get off my tuchus now that I was retired and do something. So all of that kind of added together. Here we are in front of the Army Corps of Engineer office downtown. This is a number of the leaders of the group, some lawyers, some really just very moving, sacred type of, I wouldn't say protest, but it is protest, just raising a voice and consciousness of the injustice that was happening then and placing it in historical perspective. And water, the real thing was protecting the earth. Water is life, Mini with Choni in Lakota, we are here to protect. And the marches, and this was not just in San Francisco, this was around the country. Standing with Standing Rock, water is life. And just very moving, and I felt a small part of that. I felt a connection. I think so many people did. It was hard not to. So, I had known of the various Jewish wisdom teachings and had never really connected it to right here in not our home. We are guests in someone else's home, and how all of these started becoming more meaningful to me. And these are phrases that many of you already know. From the book of Leviticus, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa ani yud he vav he. Do not stand idly by the blood of your fellow human beings. I am God, the transformative power, the great spirit. This began to have some meaning for me. Lech lecha, go el haaretz asher ar'eka. Get yourself forth physically and spiritually and go into yourself to examine what is moving you to go to the land which I will show you. I felt a definite sense of movement and momentum here, generated by the more I was learning. And then tzedek, tzedek tirdof, of course. Justice, justice shall you pursue. What moved me to volunteer? Justice for the land and Mother Earth. The First Nations' conception of the earth, sky, and water as living, interrelated organisms and our obligation to be stewards of the health of the earth was just so moving to me. The sanctity of the protector's prayerful struggle to preserve the water. Parallels in the injustices by Israel towards Palestinians, the trampling of land and water rights. You know, we often talk about, in the Jewish tradition, how we've been really removed from the land for so many centuries, where our biblical ancestors were of the land, of the earth, and were very close to the earth. And it's only in recent years that there are things like urban Adamah and other movements that are Torah wilderness, are trying to get the Jewish spirit back to the land from the way as it was at one time in the past. And here we are seeing in real life people on whose land we are intimately, always having been intimately connected to the land, and everything within the land being alive and interconnected and organic and yeah. Some more Jewish wisdom teachings that began to take on more meaning for me. Bal tashchit, do not waste or destroy the environment, the land, the animals. These are Jewish wisdom teachings that were followed by Native Americans who preceded us Jewish people by about 9,000 years. And I think that this wisdom is so deeply ingrained that in a way our teachings of the past 2,000 years kind of parrot that in a way. But the source of this wisdom, or at least older sense of the same wisdom, comes from the Native Americans on whose land we are guests. Tsar ba'alei chayim, the suffering of living creatures. You shall not inflict pain, harm, suffering on any living creature. And to witness the Native American approach to the land, for them, the land is alive, the water is alive, the sky is alive, the sky is Father, the moon, the Mother Earth, the Great Spirit over all. All are living, and we should not inflict pain. They do not inflict pain on the earth. They do not inflict pain on anything natural. And we talk about the suffering of living creatures. How might we think about the earth and all the universe as alive as well? On the bottom, Hoshienu Elohim, kivau mayim ad nafesh. In the Talmud this is written, God save us, water is our soul, our life. Food for thought. And then finally from the book of Genesis, Vayikach Yud He Vav He Elohim et ha'adam vayanichehu began Eden le'ovda u'leshomra. God took and placed the human in the Garden of Eden to till or serve her and to tend and guard her. And this is so, I was seeing this, like I say, happening in front of my eyes among the Native American people that I really had never delved into the great wisdom that was there. What moved me to volunteer as a physician? I became aware through the Do No Harm Coalition, and then through reading, and then through reporting, of the abysmally unjust healthcare delivery to Indigenous peoples in this country. You could go on. The Indian Health Services are the last group to receive federal funding, and is often so inadequate to meet the needs of the Indigenous people, the Native Americans, the American Indians, in this place we call the United States, but throughout the Americas. The impending December 5th forced evacuation of the camps by militarized police using rubber bullets, tear gas, pepper spray, ice water spraying, and more, and the ensuing trauma brought to my attention by colleagues at UCSF and the Do No Harm Coalition. And then a desire to be of any help. By now I was really moved. I had started reading more, and I really wanted to be a part of this in very difficult situation there. By now it was already winter, and the winters on the North Dakota plains are like nothing many of us have ever experienced. It became a pediatric issue. I'm a pediatrician and a neonatologist as well. A member of the Pine Ridge, the Oglala Sioux tribe member from Pine Ridge, and was a pediatrician at Standing Rock, Dr. Sarah Jumping Eagle. I care about what is put in the water that our children drink, fracking, tar sands, crude oil pipeline spills. All these have a tremendous public health and direct health impact on these people. How long will we stand by and watch? So many of us have no conception of the daily struggle that folks on reservations deal with. And we'll talk later about why COVID is so disproportionately evident in the Native American community, despite their very careful attempts at controlling it. Another physician, David Goldberg, we wrote also about, excuse me, about the importance of water, racism and solidarity, and how water can often be the transmitter of disease, the lead levels, the cholera, everything like that, and how pure water is so necessary. And contaminated water is horrible. Excuse me. Indigenous Health, just a review. 5.2 million Americans classify as full or part American Indian. 22% live on reservations or trust lands. This is the only, quote, race that must register with the U.S. government. Barriers to care, cultural, geographic isolation, low income, inadequate sewage, inadequate water supply. It's astoundingly horrible. Leading causes of death include heart disease, cancer, accidents, diabetes, stroke. Lack of food as well, lack of decent, healthy food. High prevalence and risk for suicide, depression, obesity, substance use. I repeat, suicide and depression. And of the different medical problems we saw at Standing Rock, this was very big. SIDS, teen pregnancy, liver disease. And I'm sure my medical colleagues can think of many more things, but these are sort of the top of the list. So, there were more demonstrations that I attended here in San Francisco about Standing Rock. So my time at Standing Rock. So I got on the plane. I prepared as best I could. Some colleagues already there told me what I should bring, and I was greeted as I came into the. I drove down from Bismarck, about 30 miles to the Standing Rock camp. There were two. There was Oseti Saquin camp and the Rosebud camp. I was greeted as I entered the Oseti Saquin camp with a tremendous welcome home, is what I was told. Welcome home at the entrance by these guys that were like acting as the gatekeepers. And I was told where to go to find the medical area. hundreds of banners as I came in, all from different tribes, all from different nations. There were over 100. It was unbelievable. A palpable energy and intention was felt as soon as I entered this sacred space, which by then had thousands of people. At one time I said the peak was up to 10,000. When we were there during one of the peak, especially, we'll learn about why. 7,000 when I was there. So the concept of, in Jewish tradition, of hachnasat orchim, the welcoming of visitors, travelers, wanderers, I must say, I'd never felt more welcome anywhere, ever, as I was there, with true gratitude for whatever I could bring to help. It was truly overwhelming. Just that beginning right then. Welcome home. I was, and just seeing the first day, I just sort of explored a little bit the encampment, and I was immediately reminded of the phrase from our liturgy, "How good are your tents, O Jacob, your sacred spaces, O Israel," taken from Numbers. It was just overwhelming. It was overwhelmingly beautiful, and I began to realize the intensity and the energy there. And photographs were not to be taken. These are a few clandestine ones I took without people in the picture, because by then there was already a lot of investigation by the government of various of the leaders, and for safety and for their protection, pictures were not to be taken unless by authorized people. So I only got a few here, and then I have a few others from other people who were allowed to take pictures.
Another quick question.
Yes.
Did the Native Americans own any of this land, or?
Yes. This was this was part of their reservation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they had the rights to be there. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
So,
Right. But they didn't have the right, according to the government, to be blocking the pipeline.
Ami, they're staying outside in tents in North Dakota.
Yep. And here is, and that was, yeah. But I'll tell you, the tents that blew over when there was a bad wind were always the North Face tents that the volunteers were in, that they brought. The tents that withstood everything were the tepees, and they were the warmest as well. And here's our little medical area. You can see here was and these were little yurts that were donated by Mongol, governments in Asia. This was the herbalist tent. This was the medical tent. This was a mental health teepee. There was a woman's yurt. There was a naturalist yurt. There were about six different approaches towards medical care there, and it was something. Surrounding a small fire, not the sacred fire, but a gathering fire. Two-Spirit Camp, the LGBTQ community, as many of you might know in the traditional indigenous peoples tradition, are special, often endowed with in the past tradition, not to be shunned or discriminated against, but to a people of two spirits, as these people are called. We feel and express differently because we were blessed with two spirits, and that says it all. And it was just all one community. It's really something. Now, this I apologize for, but the day I got there, in the afternoon, I was told to go to my 3-hour orientation. And here's where I really learned, very quickly, quite a lot, and then I had to put that in practice every day after that. This was the Seven Councils Fire Camp. This was the first time in, I think, 7 generations, if I'm not mistaken, that all the Sioux nations got together. The Sioux tribes of the Sioux nations got together because before that it was all separate. and this was a auspicious occasion in that regard. It was called the Seven Council Fires Camp, 7 Lakota values. The number 7 is obviously quite special. And prayer, respect, compassion, honesty, generosity, humility, and wisdom. This is a ceremonial camp. Act accordingly. Practice Lakota values, the ones we just mentioned. Do not cultivate fear or doubt. Respect. Listen. Step back and step up. If you are new to camp, please attend the meetings. Respect the elders and mobility impaired individuals. Never interrupt someone when they're speaking. Withhold back and forth conversations. Compassion. We expect everyone to look after everyone else. Honesty. If you have an idea, consider whether you're going to stay here long enough to implement it. Withhold offering ideas or suggestions you can't commit to working on. Generosity. We ask you give more than you take. If you have something to offer or share, please check in. Humility. Be present in a state of humility and grace. If you recently arrived, please withhold from sharing your ideas right off the bat. This already starts getting, and a lot of these starts getting into the whole concept of colonialism, which pervaded the camp. Any hint of colonial attitude, any hint of colonial hubris was immediately squelched. And the day before I arrived, there had been a physician in the medical yurt that did just that. Came in, wanted to change things right away, thought he had a better idea. He was asked to leave not too soon after he arrived. Respect silence. Wisdom. Remember why you are here. To stop the pipeline is a ceremonial camp, a prayerful camp. If approaching an elder, always make that person an offering, traditionally tobacco. But making the gesture of an offering and respecting the elders was such an important concept that was in real life. And we are in a constant state of prayer and ceremony. These were the 7 values that were immediately taught to us and reiterated. And then, I'm sorry about this, but this then is how to behave and catch yourself from any hint of colonial type of behavior and more. We follow Indigenous leadership at all times. Ceremony and prayer are the bedrock of Indigenous people's connection to the land and water. We conserve and share resources. We work, wake up early, and be ready for the day. We communicate mindfully. Many campfires are places of prayer. Don't speak quietly. We understand this moment in the context of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is a process of destroying to replace. A colonizing power exports resources and people and seizes and settles on land, exercising violent control over the original inhabitants. And it goes on to explain very clearly, and this was continually being reminded to us in signs and in people's behavior being held accountable. So it was a very humbling experience for me, and I suspect for anyone coming there without this raised consciousness already. And my experience at Standing Rock raised my consciousness toward this colonialism, which has been so subtle in our privileged lives, at least in mine, and this brought it home very clearly. Indigenous history in America is one of uninterrupted resistance to colonization from 1492 to today. You may be unaware of this history or not recognize the forms it takes in indigenous cultures. Be curious. We decenter settler worldviews practices and recenter indigenous worldviews practices and leadership. And it goes on. If anyone wants a copy of this, I can send it to you. I tried to scan it a nicer fashion, and of course it didn't work. We understand cultural appropriation and make every effort not to perpetuate it. Being in the sacred space can be life-altering, especially if you're not grounded in your own spirituality, ritual, healing traditions, ancestors, or connections with the earth. And this is, I think, says what happened to me in a way. It's a beginning of a process anyway, that this deepened my connection to my own Jewish roots. Not expropriating Native American cultural approaches, but recognizing and seeing how we also have a heritage and culture given to us with great wisdom. And it deepened that connection for me. Oh, so we could go on, but it was 3 hours. And during that 3 hours, of course, they said, we need someone out here right away. Someone just slipped. So I missed, I think, maybe a little bit of this. But yeah. Then we have in our own tradition, as many of you know, what's called Musar. And Musar is a movement that began in the Enlightenment of the mid-1800s in Lithuania in an attempt to reclaim the ethical and moral teachings of Judaism, which had become either very Hasidic and, well, it was an attempt to combine both the two ends of how Judaism was being experienced then, very strong law-oriented study and very ecstatic-oriented prayer, both of which of great, of course, value. But was lost was, and what wanted to be reclaimed was this thing called Musar, where how do we, what are our Jewish texts and our Jewish traditions teach us about ethical and moral living? And I was amazed to see how so much of this is exactly what we just looked at in the previous slide. It's all there. It was all there in the Native American wisdom, way before, the 19th century Lithuania. The Musar is a beautiful movement and beautiful teachings, but you can see, and I dotted some of the ones that overlap directly, and the rest are completely written about in those pages I just showed you. All these various character traits and ethical and moral traits that we are asked to live by, and then the Musar movement has teachings and all sorts of approaches to implementing this in our lives. And again, we were quite preceded here by another great tradition. On December 4th, the day before December 5th, that was going to be the militarized overtaking of the camp. And the militarized police, you can't see here, but the road is up there and then starts becoming visible over here. There were half tracks and in desert camouflage colors, and the militarized police wore desert camouflage fatigues. And were heavily armed and were there every day. And every day or every other day, there was a prayerful confrontation with these police. And that's when we in the medical yurt were placed on alert for potential injuries coming in. But we did have, and we were forced to take direct action training to what to do if approached by a militarized police force, how to form a circle of a strong circle, what to say, what not to say. And you can see some of the, we are peaceful and prayerful. We are protectors. Isms have no place here. We are nonviolent. We are proud to stand. No masks. This is pre-COVID. No weapons, or what could be considered weapons. So, yeah. The sacred fire was something I looked forward to when I could break away from the medical yurt to go to 24 hours, 7 days a week, a place of sacred gathering, music, dance, teaching, ceremony of the historic gatherings, as I mentioned before, of the 7 Lakota councils and visiting chiefs of tribes from all over the Americas, from the top of Canada to the bottom of the Americas. And I'll never forget this one First Nations chief, and I can't recall his name, from British Columbia came with his people. And he said, quote, "We came here because we felt a shudder in the forest and heard a voice in the wind." And that, it moves me to hear that. What motivated someone from up there? I kind of felt that that's what happened in me too. And then he also said, "Mother Earth is sick, she has a fever." And this is an idea of what the militarized, this is already in the summer, before the snows came. This is a famous, the meeting of the two forces often had, what can we do for you? And there's a famous story of a chief like this, or a person of importance, coming to the police, presenting himself and offering a bottle of water. And each day he would do that, the water was spilled. Until one day he came and he offered the bottle of water, and the police took it and drank it and rubbed his chest, and there was just that mini meeting of the two forces. But it's yeah. Here you can see an example of what I was talking about. This was, I'll show you more. On November 20th of 2016, about a month before I came, less than a month before I came, which was a few weeks, there was a big action at where the police were, and the protectors came forward and were forced to go back, and it was freezing in the middle of the night, and they were sprayed with freezing water, and they were also shot at by rubber bullets, and it was horrible. And Sophia Wilansky, you may remember, she was a social worker, I think from Michigan or Minnesota, was there, and she had her arm almost completely severed by a grenade that was shot by the police, a tear gas canister or something that exploded. It caught in her here and it exploded, and it was horrible, and there were many horrible injuries that night. She, fortunately, her arm was saved, but it was just horrible. That was one of many such confrontation episodes like that. More, here's the water cannons. Yeah, and this was the tear gas being, covering their eyes with the tear gas, and the rubber bullets, and this was really for real. And the world was watching, and was watching then already in 2016, Native Americans facing excessive force in North Dakota pipeline protests. So UN report. In the medical yurt, what we saw were a variety of things happening. I was there to see about pediatric care, but I think I saw two kids. I relearned very quickly about adult medicine. But respiratory, flu, colds, I guess COPD, asthma, tear gas, pneumonitis. The tear gas caused a lingering effect in the lungs that was an inflammation that took a long time to subside. Lacerations, bites, and burns, and I'll never forget seeing people 2 weeks later after that November 20th episode with the rubber bullet wounds healing. And I'd never seen anything like that, and it was horrific. Pepper spray, concussion grenades, water cannons, dog bites. And the mental health, as I mentioned, was horrible: depression, anxiety, panic attacks. It was legal. It was proclaimed legal to hit a protester with your car if you were on that area there. The injuries: lots of fractures and lots of falls on the ice. Head trauma. Horses that were there would sometimes cause injuries. Domestic violence and sexual abuse. I don't remember seeing that, but it is very much a part. And the camps, the man camps that are set up by the companies for the pipeline construction in some of these remote areas, often have lots of men coming in, primarily men from all over. And there are always reports of sexual abuse and rape and horrible things happening, but from the men to the local people who are living there. But in the yurt, we really saw mostly of the above. And hypothermia was big. We had protocols in place and for the rewarming, and it was quite, it was every night there was something happening like that. It was a beautiful, beautiful camp. to witness, to walk around, to see. And this was our yurt. This is inside the yurt, and you can see the beautiful designs of the yurt. There's a potbelly stove in each one, and we were given food. The food there was amazing. The food, there was a whole food tent, couple of food tents, and food was always available for anyone who needed it. And we had areas all around here. It was small, but there's moi, and taking a quiet moment here. And here is the stove and all the materials, and back here we had a more intensive area for, different types of treatment, orthopedic stuff. And at the top of the yurt. And at nighttime, different signs in front of the different tents, united in prayer to protect. What inspired and instructed me again to review the deep and concentric intention that I felt there, the kavanah, the deep intention that was emanated from our yurt, and it went out, or it emanated from the sacred fire and went out. It was it was a vortex, a spiritual vortex that we hear about, that I've heard about, but I never really experienced till then. It's almost like what we read last week in the Torah reading. This place is holy, and I didn't even realize it until reflecting on it. But I realized it when I was there. Palpable and nourishing spiritual energy, stories and more stories, and teachings. I was a guest on sacred land. The prayerfulness of the struggle, the camp-wide meetings, the commitment of the volunteers, the courage and deep savvy of the protectors, consistent stories by the Veterans for Peace. I think I have a slide about who they were. The privilege to witness sacred ceremony was so moving. And I felt a connection there again, the spiritual connection for those spiritual moments of deepness I felt in my Jewish tradition. The deeply ingrained, pervasive, overt, and subtle colonialism in my life, and my task in continually identifying and shedding those aspects of my everyday life. It was really eye-opening to me in a very instructive and very sad way, to realize the sadness that the colonial effect has had on destroying, at least, having a tremendous effect on Native peoples who persist. The Veterans for Peace, when I arrived there were 7,000. While I was there, there was an influx of 3,000 veterans turned up and built within half a day these massive Kwanzaa tents, whatever they're called, big structures to house themselves in. They were called Veterans for Peace. These were veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, and older ones that were even back from Vietnam, all veterans, and all saying the same story as we saw them in the medical yurt. They had a ceremony when they arrived to apologize to the indigenous people for the long history of U.S. violence against Native Americans. And the stories I heard from them when they came in, one poor soul got off the bus and immediately broke his leg on the ice. But I asked, they were there for lots of different reasons in the medical area, and I asked the same story over and over again, why are you here? And the story repeated itself, that they said, I signed up to defend enemies of the both foreign and domestic. And when I was sent to Iraq or Afghanistan, I didn't experience that feeling. But now that I'm here, I am experiencing that feeling, because I feel that I am defending these people, these native, original, indigenous people, from the domestic enemy. And that repeated itself over and over again. I was so moved. I'm still in Facebook touch with one of them. What shocked me, the abysmal and overtly racist maltreatment of Native Americans needing care in Bismarck's ER. Now, if we had a case in the medical yurt that really needed ambulancing out for more intensive care, the closest level 3 hospital, small as it was in Bismarck. They purposely closed the direct road from Standing Rock 30 miles north into Bismarck, and because it was full of the militarized police blocking the road there and no traffic, and the ambulance would have to go about 3 or 4 miles inland and then up and a circuitous route for an extra hour of travel unnecessarily to get to the Bismarck ER. And if you were a Native American needing help there in the Bismarck ER, you were sure to be placed in a waiting line, you know, despite the severity of your illness, it seemed, from the reports that we were getting back. There was great, discrimination against anyone who was Native American. There was great hatred. And I heard this also because I had to spend 1 or 2 nights in Bismarck overnight, and in my motel in the cafeteria, I would hear these conversations about these goddamn, Indians, what are they doing? They can go to hell. All of this, it was horrible. The massive presence of militarized police vehicles shocked me, and troops on the road overlooking the encampment, a constant presence. The nature and severity of the lung disease from the effects of tear gas, the disfiguring wounds of the rubber bullets, the typically woeful state from severe federal underfunding of the Indian Health Service Hospital, there was one 20 miles south of us in Fort Yates. There was an Indian Health Hospital, horribly funded, horribly staffed in terms of not having enough materials. And so the lesser cases would go there. But, the needless and cruel military blockade of the direct 30-mile route from Standing Rock to Bismarck, requiring an extra hour of driving in treacherous, and I can guarantee you it was treacherous driving at night there, on a desolate 2-lane road without lighting, without even being able to see the road in front of you. This was the care at Native American health facilities called horrifying and unacceptable in a Senate hearing. I'm not sure if this is the Fort Yates one or not. The injustice continues now during COVID. On the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, Native Americans today comprise 9% of the population, yet account for 14% of all COVID cases in the state, and 15% of all the deaths. And this has a lot to do with, despite the efforts to try to minimize the problem within the reservation, the poor access to food and health and all the poor living conditions that these people are placed under, are forced into, will inevitably cause the COVID to spread. And they have checkpoints that are being to try to keep people out who are suspect, who are infectious till proven otherwise with COVID, and they're doing their best. But it's per capita the hardest hit of any racial or ethnic group in the country. Public resistance to the Native American checkpoints, the reservation land. It's horrible. It's just horrible, and we need to learn more about it. The last stand. What happened was I stayed there for my 8 days, which seemed like 8 years, and I came back. When I was there on December 4th doing that special action training, that was the day that Obama put in a halt to any further construction of the DAPL, citing the fact that the company, the Army Corps of Engineers, had not issued a sufficient environmental impact survey. And I remember during the training I was getting, there was suddenly a kid came running into the training area and said, "We won." And people just kind of paid a little attention but continued with our training. And then you started hearing this rumbling roar throughout the camp. And we just stopped the training and realized that in fact Obama had stopped and it was a victory. Temporary, but it was a victory until Trump took over. And then by February, this is what ended up happening. They claimed that it had to be evacuated, the camp, because of flooding concerns, was the excuse that they used. But the Native Americans burned, rather than have anything be desecrated by the police, many of the tents and their possession and their living structures, they burned to prevent any defiling. But here they are, they finally overrun. Here's the road. You can see this goes on for a long way. And this is exactly one vehicle after the next, like this one. We're up there the entire time I was there. And they came in and tore everything down. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just kind of, not just a few more slides. What can we do? The Native organizer Kelly Hayes, it's crucial that we recognize that Standing Rock is part of an ongoing struggle. This is already against colonial violence. The struggle still continued after the encampment was disbanded and destroyed, rather, in the courts. Continual attempts to stop the flow of the oil. No DAPL is a front of struggle in a long-erased war, a war that has been active since first contact and waged without interruptions. Our efforts to survive the conditions of the anti-Native society have gone unnoticed because white supremacy is the law of the land and because we as Native people have been pushed beyond the limits of public consciousness. To reiterate, we are not simply here when you see us, and that is so true. The moment is first and foremost about Native liberation, self-determination, and Native survival. That needs to be centered and celebrated. And then what can we do from our own famous teachings? Well, this is Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who has the famous quote among so many of his famous quotes. Morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings, that indifference to evil is worse than evil itself, that in a free society some are guilty, but all are responsible. And I love this story, which I'm sure many of you know. 1848, Thoreau went to jail for refusing as a protest against the Mexican War to pay his poll tax. When Ralph Waldo Emerson, his buddy, came to bail him out, Emerson said, "Henry, what are you doing in there?" Thoreau quietly replied, "Ralph, what are you doing out there?" And that, what are we doing out here, folks? So, back in 2000, the first steps afterwards for what we could have done and what we did do, San Francisco a few years ago moved to divest over $1 billion from companies financing the DAPL in March of 2017. My wife and I changed from Wells Fargo, which was also funding the DAPL and other pipelines, to a credit union and transferred our funds there and have been very happy ever since. Divesting from all these different groups to other people-run organizations, and credit unions are a good bet. And things that we could still do, divest from those banks which funded DAPL and many other pipelines still under construction. Support in actions and demonstrations, such as an organization such as Idle No More, Do No Harm Coalition, and I'll list a couple of other ones that have popped up recently. Support the legal defense funds. Remember, the courts can turn the oil off. And what you can do now is follow the news. Native News Online is a very good resource. Levi Rickert is the editor and writes incredible columns about what's happening now throughout the country, throughout all the indigenous nations. And the Indigenous Environmental Network is an important organization that also disseminates incredible information and is behind a lot of the actions, and they should be followed and supported. And more locally, and I'm not sure if any members of Jewel are if you are, you can unmute and say hi. Jewel is the organization called Jews on Ohlone Land. It's an amazing local, it's locally run. And you should go to their website and help them in any way you can. They do great teaching about colonialism and our role as white settlers on lands that do not belong to us. Contribute to the West Berkeley Shell Mound Legal Defense Fund and all the shell mounds. There's one in Vallejo, there's all these different shell mounds that are being desecrated. And I learned about the many shell mounds of the Bay Area. The support to Sogoriete Land Trust, payment of a Shumi land tax. This is monies that you can pay to help in all of the work that, as a payback in a way, as a gift. And I think that's what the word Shumi means, is gift. It's tzedakah. to help these organizations in the work that they're doing. And the Native American Health Center of the Bay Area is important to know about and support. This is the Bay Area is the place where it's in the United States. This is the most intertribal groups are in one concentrated area is the Bay Area, and there's the Intertribal Friendship House in Oakland, which is an amazing place, and then the Native American Health Center also caters to all peoples of all different indigenous tribes and nations. And last, I'll just close, I know we're going over. The good news, recently, 3 separate cases, pipelines planned to go through or near native lands have been either delayed or stopped. Yes, the DAPL, the Keystone, and the Atlantic Coast, which just kind of gave up in the face of all the opposition. But DAPL and Keystone have once again, the courts have passed down what Obama did when I was there in December of 2016, and have reinstituted this insistence that there be an environmental impact survey that hasn't been done properly. This will delay things maybe between 1 and 3 years, but it's a victory. And the oil can be turned off. And as of now, it's anything that's happening has been interrupted. And you can read this in the American Prospect. That's Robert Reich's product. And one last thing, I think this is the last thing, how the women of Standing Rock are now building sovereign economies. The women started this whole thing. Women and teenagers really began the whole movement at Standing Rock. Food security, traditional agricultural, local self-reliance are the key to regenerative societies of the future. Say water protectors, taking the movement's lessons forward. These are 3, the Donna Brave Bull Allard was at Standing Rock when I was there. These are 3 amazing women among many that are really looking for self-sustaining avenues for Native Americans now, and not relying on handouts from the government all the time, but really the move is heavy and strong now for self-sustaining resources. And I think that's all. Yeah. So I hope that gave you an idea of my journey here and how it deeply affected and transformed me as a Jew and as a physician who saw the promise through all those different yurts of seamless health care, and how everyone's approach to a medical issue can all work together. If a person came in with a cold and we saw them in a medical yurt, and we would say, you might be best served here at the naturopath yurt. Or if a person came to the naturopath yurt, they would say, you might be better served in the medical yurt. Or on cultural questioning, you would be assigned, the patient would be given the type of care that was most consistent with their cultural orientation. Yeah, I could tell lots of stories, but we don't have time about the medical aspects of it. It was quite amazing, and I learned a lot. And I felt quite privileged to be given the opportunity. So I'll stop sharing. I don't know if there's anyone left. So that was a mouthful. And I'd like to.
Bravo.
No, I'd like to thank mainly the people at the Do No Harm Coalition at UCSF and Dr. Rupa Maria, who is now studying the public health impact of evictions in San Francisco, the public health impact of all these unjust actions that are happening. And she helped start a clinic. There was a little town called Cannonball, just about almost adjacent to the Sacred Stone camps, Standing Rock camps. And that clinic is still in existence. And it was through her action and amazing leadership that clinic is now in existence. So there's lots of work, but besides the work and the donations, there's just a lot of accounting that we need to do about our subtle and not so subtle colonial approaches to life and to people and the destructiveness of that. And if we want to learn about that, there's lots written, and Jewel is a good site to go to also, and could use your support. They can speak to your groups about this. So any questions?
That was wonderful, wonderful. This is Stephen Sondheim. I want to say something on a positive note. Oil is losing favor with the market. We're moving on to other things. And in my opinion, in a short period of time, 10 to 15 years, there'll be incredibly less demand, if no demand for it. In fact, already much of this oil that they were getting from faraway places, dirty places and doing bad things to get it there, to Texas, I guess, is being shipped overseas. We don't even need it in our own market. And that's a bad thing in itself, that we should extract from our land and do all these bad things for money to, anyway. But the hopeful thing is that both oil and coal the demand is lessening. And I'm a big person in transportation too. When the demand lessens, there's less need to do these really bad, you might say colonial or bad to other people things. When the market dries up, we move on to other things. So that in a sense is hopeful.
Right.
But
can we ask questions?
Yes, please. Anyone?
Well, I'm just suggesting we ask questions. Yeah. I wanted you to elaborate on what you said at the end, and I heard in the middle about this consciousness of being in a colonial society. And so where do you go with that? Personally, like both emotionally and literally, where do you go?
Yeah.
You know?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just how do you live with that? Where is that leading you? I'm wondering.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and other people can comment too who have thought about this. I mean, you can see colonial consciousness in your daily interactions with people on the street or within your own family. Just mind-opening to me about my way is the way. You don't matter. I am. You're here. I mean, the whole. You're here to serve me. What resources can I extract from you to better me? All these things that I haven't really paid as close attention to in my daily life as I now hope to have been doing as a result of my experiences there, I think are very instructive for me. And I think it just begins, and not on the macro level and the big level of going out and, trying to change things for the Native American community on a big level, but to start small and to work out. And I think I was catapulted into that quickly during my experience there. But I see that I just to recognize the amount of work I have to do personally, I think is step one. To acknowledge this with not just with Native American people, but with all peoples, and then become more specific. So I think for me personally, I think that it's there's just a lot of constant work to be done. I feel that it's like we are all, or at least I feel there is racism in me that I have to work on. I think many of us need to admit that we are all racist in a way, to a degree. We are all colonial to a degree. The first step is to recognize that, to what degree, where are we with that, and then to start working on it. It's a transformative process that for me began really then. And does that help? Did that say anything, Ron? I don't know.
Well, that answers where you're at with it, which is the key thing here in this presentation. I just wonder, when they're talking about the struggle against colonialism since 1492, it's kind of like, and you brought up the parallel to Israel. It's like, well, where do you guys, do all the immigrants in the United States of America go back to where they came from? Like, what is a kind of where do we go with this? Because that's
Yeah,
unlikely to happen.
I hear you. I hear
And
you.
people immigrate around the world now. So how do we deal with
Right.
that? It's just
It's almost like there are some things that won't change that have been so established already, but there's still more work to do, not with upending everything necessarily, but to start reconciliation, reparations, all sorts of other actions that can happen that are also against the colonial heritage that I think, I inherited to a degree. But anyway, thanks, Ron. Any other questions or comments or wisdom from other people, please?
Do UCSF staff or faculty still go to Standing Rock, or is that over? Or?
Oh yeah, no, the encampment has been disbanded. Now, whether they go to the clinic in Cannonball, I don't know. I haven't, been in touch with them that closely lately about that. But for a while after the encampment was taken down, Rupa and others from the Do No Harm Coalition were going. And UCSF does go to other reservations to offer medical aid as well. That I know. But yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I guess I'll just jump in. I was wondering if you had an opinion on what would be the most impactful way that somebody could support our Native peoples if you do not have very much money. What would be as impactful or the next best thing, if you have an opinion about that?
Apart from doing donations, in other words.
That's what I'm saying. Not
Yeah.
all of us. Some of us are very poor.
Yeah. Wow. I think that that's a good question. There are these different organizations. I would contact Jews on Ohlone land. I think to show up. I do know that there are regular shell mound gatherings. There are regular gatherings on behalf of the different struggles that are still happening in the Bay Area. I think to show up is a step, because by showing up you'll learn more about what's happening, and you'll learn what you can do more concretely, maybe as a volunteer or as an ally. So I would investigate what's happening in the different. I know there was Patricia St. Ange in Berkeley is very much working towards allowing for Native American ceremonies to happen in Berkeley, that's been shut down by the city. I mean, there's lots to show up for. You can go on the web and just see if there are any shell mound gatherings, and that's a good start right there for the local area, I think. And maybe it'll start proliferating from there. You can go from there, and also find out more about what's happening with the Ohlone people. I know the Intertribal Friendship House has activities happening. Eric Bergman has gone. I've seen him there for different events. There are things happening. I think to show up first would be something towards establishing yourself as an ally. That's just, maybe others have other thoughts. Well, it's 8:20.
Ami, this is Jake.
Yeah,
I just
hi, Jake.
want to say thank you so much for doing this. And, I've hardly been getting to any of our gatherings, but this really caught my eye. And I'm very grateful to hear about your experience and about what was going on there. And
Thank you, Jake.
grateful to hear, but also sad to hear, it's just really brutal, horrible stuff that's still going on today. And And so I was very touched.
Well, thank you, Jake.
By
Thank you for
this. So,
thank you for
thank
coming
you.
tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ami. Thank
Well,
you
thank you,
so
guys.
much.
Thank you. You know, I'll say one thing about songs. I'm not going to sing one, but if there was one, and there's many beautiful chants, Lakota chants. I mean, you can go on Google and just listen and buy CDs of some of the famous Lakota chants. I learned a lot about Defarge, who was a contemporary of Phil Oakes and all of the song. He was like the Native American voice of the 1960s. If you have, is it Richard Defarge? His last name is Defarge. Listen to some of his songs. Johnny Cash redid a lot of his music in a re-release of an album he did like 40 years ago, and then he re-released it about 5 years ago. You may have heard of that. Well, you know, obviously before he passed away. There's a lot of great Native American folk music from that period of the 60s. And then, in closing, you all know about Batya Levine, who is a very wonderful contemporary Jewish writer of melodies for the liturgy. And she wrote a song that she wrote it, I think, after Trump was elected, but she wrote it, she was also a volunteer at Standing Rock. And when I first heard it years ago, I was immediately, I heard Native American hints of the notes there. So if you haven't heard Rise Up by Batya Levine, listen to it on Google or buy your CD. But you can at least hear that one song. It really says a lot about the wisdom of the elders. And then Holly Near's song, I Am Open, talks about the wisdom of the elders is what we need now. And this is directly, I won't say expropriated, but it's borrowed from Native American culture, which preceded all of our wonderful traditions by thousands and thousands of years. To just appreciate the depth of that is something. So those are some songs to listen to.
Holly Near 1,000 Grandmothers.
And 1,000 Grandmothers and Oliver Gray. But Batya Levine, it's a simple song that I think many of you have heard already.
So I would like to offer to everybody who is in this class, some of the slides that Ami showed had some of the resources that have been discussed, but they went by kind of fast if you weren't writing them all down. That's okay. I was going to say that I can send them this information to you all in email form. I'll get together with Ami afterwards and he can give me that in some sort of a format that I can send to interested parties, which I guess would be everybody who signed up for this class, since you have your email. So that would be an extra added bonus follow-up from this class.
That'd be great.
Was this recorded? I have some people who work in this arena.
Yeah, it was recorded.
In other areas, that this would mean a lot to them, if that's okay, if I send it to them.
Yeah, it's fine. And also this class is recorded. It's now being archived on our Facebook page at the Aquarian Minyan on Facebook, so you can see it there. And I may even put it up on YouTube, who knows? So I just want to